My name is Edward Hale. A month ago, I buried the love of my life, Margaret. We had been married for 40 years, and in all those years, she had been my anchor, my balance, my reason to wake up each morning. When she passed, I thought grief was the heaviest burden I would ever carry. But I was wrong. The weight of grief is heavy, yes, but the weight of betrayal from your own blood is something far darker. Margaret's funeral was quiet, the way she would have wanted. Friends, a few relatives, and Andrew, our only son. He stood tall, dressed in an expensive suit, looking every inch the successful man he claimed to be. He hugged me with a kind of stiffness that didn't feel like grief, but I brushed it off. People grieve differently, I told myself. I had no idea at the time that Andrew wasn't grieving at all. He was already calculating. In the days after, Andrew visited often. He would show up with his smooth smile and a practiced tone of concern. "Dad, you shouldn't be living here alone in this big place. It's too much for you to handle. The stairs, the maintenance, the memories, it's not healthy." His words sounded like care, but there was something rehearsed about them. Margaret always said Andrew had a silver tongue. "He could sell sand in the desert," she used to laugh. But now, with her gone, his words didn't feel like charm. They felt like strategy. One evening, about 2 weeks after the funeral, Andrew came over with a briefcase. We sat in the living room, Margaret's favorite space, still smelling faintly of her lavender candles, and he laid out a stack of papers on the coffee table. "Dad," he said, lowering his voice as if he were doing me a favor, "I need to be honest with you. Mum's estate, the house, the investments, it's all been left to me. It's cleaner this way. I'll manage everything, make sure it doesn't get messy. You don't have to worry about a thing." I remember staring at him, not quite understanding. "Andrew, what are you saying?" He leaned back, adjusting his tie. "I'm saying you can't stay here. This is my house now. You're not equipped to handle it. I've been letting you stay out of kindness, but it's time you found somewhere else, somewhere more appropriate. Appropriate. That word cut me deeper than the others. I tried to protest, but he silenced me with one last dagger. "Find somewhere else to rot, Dad. You're useless now." My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I thought I'd collapse right there. I had given him everything, my years, my sacrifices, my name, and now he looked at me as if I were nothing more than a burden. I packed my bags that night, 2 suitcases and a box of photos, 40 years of marriage condensed into luggage. Andrew stood by the door, checking his phone, tapping his watch, as if I were nothing more than an appointment running late. The cold air outside bit at my face as I stepped onto the porch. Behind me, the door closed with a finality that echoed in my chest. It wasn't just a door shutting. It was my son erasing me from the life Margaret and I had built together. I walked down the driveway in silence. No shouting, no scene. Just silence. Because deep down, I remembered something Margaret had once whispered to me months before she passed, when we were quietly talking about the future. "Don't worry, Edward. Whatever happens, you'll be protected." At the time, I hadn't understood what she meant, but as I carried my bags into the night, humiliated and heartbroken, her words repeated in my head. Protected. I didn't know it then, but Margaret had set a plan in motion long before her last breath. And Andrew, in all his arrogance, had no idea that his cruel words had just sealed his own downfall. The night I left my own home, the house Margaret and I had built over 4 decades, is etched into me like a scar. I remember every sound, every glance, every moment. Andrew didn't even bother helping me carry my bags to the car. He just stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, scrolling on his phone, as if the eviction of his father was nothing more than a minor inconvenience in his schedule. The same man who had once clutched my hand at 5 years old, terrified of thunderstorms, now couldn't spare me a shred of humanity. When I dragged the last suitcase out, he finally spoke. Dad, don't take this the wrong way. This is for the best. You'll be happier somewhere else. A retirement community maybe, people your own age, activities, less stress. I stopped on the porch and turned to look at him. His words were smooth, almost polished, like he had practiced them in the mirror. Andrew, I said quietly, this is my home. His face hardened. The mask slipped just for a second. No, Dad, it's mine now. You just can't accept that Mom trusted me to handle things. I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream that Margaret had never been the kind of woman to leave me with nothing. But grief is a strange weight. It weakens your arms, steals your voice. I stood there, clutching the handle of my suitcase, and said nothing. Find somewhere else to rot, he muttered, almost under his breath, but loud enough for me to hear. You're useless now. The words burned. My chest tightened like someone had struck me with a hammer. I thought of Margaret, of how proud she used to be of Andrew. She used to say he had her smile and my determination. But standing there in the doorway, I realized he had inherited neither her warmth nor my sense of duty. Only her smile remained, and even that was twisted into something cold. I walked down the driveway in silence, dragging my suitcases behind me. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. As I reached the end of the street, I glanced back one last time. Through the window, I saw Andrew pacing in the living room, already on the phone. His voice carried faintly through the glass, animated and urgent. I didn't need to hear the words to know what he was doing. He was making plans, calling associates, maybe even creditors. He wasn't mourning his mother. He was celebrating his windfall. I checked into a small roadside inn, the kind of place you don't notice until you need it. The neon sign outside flickered, buzzing like a dying insect. Inside, the room smelled faintly of mildew, and the carpet had seen better decades. I placed my bags on the bed and sat down heavily. 40 years. That's how long Margaret and I had built that house. Raised. Andrew turned every corner into a memory. And now, in the space of a single evening, I was a stranger cast out into the night. I pulled out a small wooden box from my suitcase, the one I had grabbed almost without thinking. Inside were photos. Our wedding day, Andrew's graduation, Margaret laughing in the garden she loved so much. I held one picture of her close, remembering her voice. You'll be protected, Edward. Trust me. I didn't understand it then, but I clung to it now. Margaret had been deliberate, always one step ahead when it came to our family's future. If she said I would be protected, then somewhere in those papers, Andrew waved around so confidently, there had to be truth she had hidden just for me. Sleep didn't come easily that night. My mind replayed every detail. The sharpness in Andrew's voice, the finality of the door closing, the way he treated me like a burden instead of his father. But beneath the hurt, something else began to stir. Resolve. I wasn't finished yet. Andrew thought he had won. But Margaret had left me with more than memories. She had left me with faith that the truth would find me. And when it did, Andrew's empire of arrogance would crumble in his hands. From the small, dimly lit motel room, I watched my son's new life unfold like a play I was no longer a part of. It didn't take long for word to spread in town. Andrew Hale, the grieving son who had just inherited a fortune, was celebrating his new beginning. I heard about it from an old friend who bumped into him downtown. Andrew was seen dining at one of the most expensive restaurants, ordering bottles of wine that cost more than I used to make in a month. He walked in with the confidence of a man who thought he owned the world, and maybe in that moment he believed he did. Creditors, too, seemed to appear like moths drawn to his flame. Men in sharp suits and polished shoes began visiting him at the house. I recognized one of them when I passed by the neighborhood a few days later, walking with my suitcase to the bus stop. His name was Martin Lowe, a man known for lending money with interest rates that could bleed a man dry. Andrew shook his hand, firmly, laughing like they were old friends. but I knew better. Martin Lowe didn't shake hands unless there was a debt to collect. I understood then what Margaret must have suspected before she died. Andrew hadn't just been living above his means, he'd been drowning in it. Gambling, risky investments, deals with men like Martin. The inheritance wasn't just a windfall for him, it was a lifeline. At first, Andrew moved fast. New suits, a new car, expensive furniture arriving at the house in glossy trucks. He called contractors to tear down the kitchen Margaret had cherished, boasting about modern designs and luxury renovations. It was like he wanted to erase every trace of her. I sat in the diner across the street one afternoon, sipping burnt coffee, and watched him step out of a black car with two men. He looked confident, arrogant, but I could see it, the desperation underneath. His smiles were too wide, his handshakes too firm, his laughter too loud. That wasn't celebration. That was fear wearing a mask. And then there was his lawyer, Victor. Green, a young man with slicked back hair, perfectly tailored suits, and the kind of arrogance you only find in people who have never known loss. Victor became Andrew's shadow, always at his side, always whispering in his ear. He assured Andrew that everything was legal, that the documents proved he was the rightful heir, that his father had no claim. But Victor didn't know Margaret. She had been meticulous. Every detail mattered to her. She wouldn't have left me exposed, not after all we'd been through. One evening I overheard Andrew on the phone outside the house. His voice carried across the quiet street. "Relax, I'll have the money by the end of the month. The house is mine. The accounts are mine. My father is out of the picture. Everything is under control. Everything is under control." The phrase struck me, because when a man says those words, it usually means nothing is. I walked away into the night, my steps heavier, but my mind clearer. Andrew thought his rise was unstoppable, that money and influence could rewrite the truth. But he was building his empire on sand, and the tide was already on its way in. As I lay back in the motel bed later that night, Margaret's words echoed again. "You'll be protected." And I realized she had known Andrew better than either of us wanted to admit. She had planned for this arrogance, for this betrayal. Somewhere in that will, there had to be a safeguard, and when the time came for the truth to be read, Andrew's rise would collapse faster than it had begun. A week passed in that cramped motel room, each day stretching longer than the last. I lived off stale coffee and cheap sandwiches, watching the world move on while I sat in limbo. But the more I replayed Andrew's words in my head, "Find somewhere else to rot. You're useless now," the less they crushed me and the more they sharpened me. Margaret had always been precise, deliberate. She kept lists for everything: groceries, birthdays, bills, even small notes about conversations she wanted to remember. A woman like her didn't leave this world without making sure I was cared for. And yet, Andrew had presented his case with such confidence, bolstered by his slick lawyer, Victor Green. Something didn't add up. I remembered Margaret mentioning Mr. Harrison Clark, the family's longtime attorney. He'd handled everything for us over the years: the purchase of the house, Margaret's investments, even the paperwork when Andrew first went off to college. If anyone knew the truth, it would be him. So I put on my old blazer, the one that still carried Margaret's perfume from the last time she hugged me in it, and took the bus downtown. Clark's office was in a modest brick building, the kind that radiated quiet authority. No flashy signs, no marble lobbies, just a brass plaque. By the door that read, "Harrison Clark, Attorney at Law," inside, the receptionist looked up as I entered. "Mr. Hale, he's been expecting you." Expecting me? That gave me pause. Moments later, I was ushered into Harrison Clark's office. He was in his 70s, his hair silver but neatly combed, his suit pressed to perfection. His eyes, though, were what struck me: kind, steady, the eyes of a man who carried the weight of secrets with care. "Edward," he said warmly, rising to shake my hand, "I was beginning to wonder when you'd come. I frowned. You were expecting me? He nodded. Of course. Margaret spoke to me at length before she passed. She was worried about Andrew. Hearing her name in his voice nearly undid me. I steadied myself and asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Mr. Clark, Andrew says he inherited everything. The house, the accounts, 33 million. He showed me documents, told me I had nothing. Clark's expression darkened. He opened a leather-bound folder on his desk and slid a set of papers toward me. Edward, that's not true. Your wife updated her will 6 months before her passing. I handled it personally. You were always her priority. I stared at the documents, Margaret's familiar handwriting visible in the margins where she'd made notes. Clark continued, his tone firm. The house and 70% of all assets are yours. The remaining 30% was designated for Andrew, but with conditions. Margaret insisted on a clause. Andrew would only receive his share if he treated you with respect and provided care, should you need it. My throat tightened. Respect and care. Margaret had foreseen everything. Clark leaned back in his chair. I attempted to contact you for the reading, but Andrew told me you were traveling and too distraught to attend. That's when I knew something was wrong. So Andrew had lied to Clark, just as he'd lied to me. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief. I felt vindicated. When will the will be read officially? I asked. Clark folded his hands. In 3 days. I've summoned Andrew. He's bringing his attorney, Victor. Green, you should be there, Edward. Margaret wanted you to be. I nodded slowly, the weight of despair finally beginning to lift. My son had taken my home, stripped me of my dignity, and called me useless. But Margaret, even from the grave, had given me a weapon far stronger than anger. She had given me the truth, and in 3 days, the truth would be read aloud for everyone to hear. The day of the reading arrived heavy with tension. I hadn't slept much the night before. I kept picturing Margaret's face, her calm assurance when she once told me, "You'll be protected, Edward." Those words had carried me through the humiliation of being thrown out, through the loneliness of the motel room. Now they felt like a promise, about to be fulfilled. Mr. Harrison Clark's office was quiet when I arrived. The polished oak table gleamed under the soft light, and the air smelled faintly of leather and old books. It was the kind of room where truth felt heavier, inescapable. Andrew walked in a few minutes later, flanked by his lawyer, Victor Green. Andrew's suit was new, charcoal grey, perfectly tailored. His tie was too tight, but he wore his arrogance like armor. He glanced at me once, his lips curling into a smirk. "Dad," he said smoothly, as though we were meeting for lunch instead of sitting across a battlefield. Victor Green extended his hand to Clark with forced politeness. "Mr. Clark, I hope we can settle this quickly. My client has obligations to attend to." Clark didn't flinch. His expression was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who knew more than he was letting on. "We'll proceed as Margaret wished. Nothing more, nothing less." I sat across from Andrew. He leaned back casually, legs crossed, radiating confidence. He believed this was nothing more than a formality, the last step before he could solidify his grip on everything. Clark began, his voice measured. "This is the last will and testament of Margaret Hale, signed and notarized 6 months before her passing." Victor interrupted almost immediately. "We have a copy of a more recent draft. It leaves everything to my client. That's the version we recognize." Clark raised an eyebrow. "Your copy is dated 3 years ago. This," he tapped the document, "is the final legal version. Unless you have evidence Margaret changed her mind after signing this, your draft is obsolete." Andrew shifted uncomfortably, but his smirk returned quickly. "Dad knows Mom trusted me to handle things. He's not cut out for investments or estate matters. This is just a technicality." I kept my silence. I wanted him to believe I was beaten, wanted his arrogance to blind him for just a few more moments. Clark continued reading, his voice steady. To my beloved husband, Edward Hale, I leave our primary residence, including all furnishings and personal effects, as well as 70% of our financial assets and accounts. Andrew's head snapped toward him. The smirk faltered. Clark didn't pause. The remaining 30% is designated for my son, Andrew Hale, contingent upon his treatment of his father with dignity and respect following my death. The room went still. Andrew sat upright, his face flushing red. What is this? That's not what she intended. Victor leaned forward, his voice sharp. This clause is vague. What constitutes dignity and respect? It could be argued, Clark, or cut him off. It could not. Your client evicted his father from his own home within weeks of Margaret's passing. He told him he was useless. That is neither dignity nor respect. Andrew's jaw tightened. His confidence was cracking, but he tried to recover. You can't prove that. I finally spoke, my voice low but firm. I don't need to. You said it to my face, Andrew, and I'll never forget it. The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, Andrew looked unsure. His lawyer shifted uncomfortably, searching for an angle that wasn't there. Clark cleared his throat. There is one more item. He reached into his folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. Margaret left a letter for you, Edward, and a note for Andrew as well. The air in the room grew colder. I could feel Andrew's eyes on me, burning, with a mix of anger and fear. Margaret's voice was about to enter this room from beyond the grave, and I knew it would cut deeper than any legal document ever could. Mr. Harrison Clark held the sealed envelope carefully, as if it carried something far heavier than paper. My chest tightened the moment I saw Margaret's handwriting on the front. Even now, even after weeks without her, I recognized it instantly. Elegant, deliberate, the way she always signed birthday cards and notes she'd leave for me on the kitchen counter. This, Clark said gently, was written by Margaret in her final weeks. She insisted it be read only after the terms of the will were made clear. Andrew scoffed, leaning back in his chair. More theatrics. What could a letter possibly change? The assets are mine. Everyone knows it. But his voice cracked on the last word. Clark broke the seal and unfolded the letter. His voice softened as he read aloud, but I barely heard him at first. All I could see was Margaret's face, her smile, her calm certainty whenever she believed in something. To my husband Edward and to my son Andrew, if you are hearing these words, then I am gone. I want this letter to remind you of the values I lived by and the legacy I hope to leave with you both. Clark paused, his eyes flicking to me. My throat burned as I listened. Edward, you have been my partner, my strength, my safe harbor. This home, this life we built, it belongs to you as much as it belonged to me. My wish is that you live out your days in peace and dignity, knowing how deeply you were loved. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I stayed still, listening. Andrew, you are my son. I have loved you from the moment I first held you in my arms. But love is not blind. I have seen your impatience, your hunger for wealth, your disregard for your father's sacrifices. That is why I included the clause in my will. You will inherit only if you prove capable of honoring your father, the man who gave everything to raise you. If you cannot show him respect, then you will have shown me that you cannot be trusted with what I leave behind. The room was silent. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Andrew's face drained of color. He clenched his fists on the table, his knuckles white. She didn't mean that, he said sharply. She was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. Clark folded the letter slowly, sliding it back into the envelope. Margaret was clear-headed to the very end. This letter was her final instruction. I finally looked at Andrew. Your mother knew you better than you realized. She gave you a chance, Andrew. A chance to prove you'd grown into the man she believed you could be, and instead, you proved her worst fears true. His eyes darted toward Victor Green, desperate for support, but even his lawyer seemed shaken. Victor shifted in his seat, tugging at his collar. "Andrew, this complicates matters. The clause is enforceable, and with this letter there's little room for interpretation." Andrew slammed his hand on the table. "No, this is my inheritance. My life depends on it. You can't take it away from me." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "I didn't take it away. You did. The day you called me useless, the day you threw me out of the house Margaret and I built, you signed away everything she left you." For a long moment, Andrew just stared at me, his jaw trembling. Behind his eyes, I saw it. The fear, the desperation. Not because he had lost the money, but because he knew what losing it meant. His debts, his creditors, the people he had promised. In payment to, they would all come knocking now, and when they did, he would have nothing left to give them. Clark closed his folder with a firm snap. "This concludes the reading of Margaret Hale's will." He stood, signaling that the matter was finished, but for Andrew it was only beginning. The letter was folded, but its words still hung in the room like smoke that refused to clear. Margaret had spoken with such clarity, such foresight, that for a moment even I sat stunned. It was as if she were in the room, watching us, her calm presence cutting through Andrew's arrogance. Andrew's composure cracked completely. He leaned forward, his face pale, sweat gathering at his temples. "Dad, listen to me. This doesn't have to go public. We can work something out." His voice was lower now, not arrogant but pleading. Victor Green touched his arm, whispering something I couldn't catch, but Andrew brushed him off. For the first time in his life, he wasn't listening to his lawyer. He was desperate. "Dad," he said again, his voice trembling, "I'll admit I handled things badly, but I was under pressure. You don't understand the people I owe money to. I needed access to the estate quickly. If you help me now, we can make this right." There it was, the truth clawing its way out. His debts, the shadow he'd been running from. Margaret had been right, as always. I let the silence stretch, studying him. My son, once full of promise, reduced to this, a man begging not for forgiveness, but for survival. "Andrew," I said slowly, "your mother gave you a chance to prove yourself. You squandered it. You didn't just disrespect me. You disrespected her memory." His voice cracked. "I was scared. I still am. These people, they don't forgive mistakes. If I don't pay them, He trailed off, pressing his hands into his hair, rocking slightly in his chair. Victor finally spoke, his tone sharp but tinged with unease. "Edward, my client is facing immediate financial obligations. Perhaps there's a path forward if you choose to—" I raised my hand, cutting him off. "Mr. Green, I've heard enough. Margaret's will was clear. Andrew brought this on himself." Andrew's desperation deepened. He shoved the letter aside, his voice rising. "She was wrong. Mom didn't know what she was asking. Respect? Dignity? Those are just words. What about my future? What about everything I've built?" Clark leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "Andrew, your mother's words are not just words. They are legally binding, and more than that, they are her legacy. You have no future built on deception and greed." That was the point. Andrew's eyes darted between us like a cornered animal. He tried to summon anger, but it collapsed into something smaller, panic. His hands trembled as he pushed away from the table, pacing the room. "You don't get it," he muttered. "They'll ruin me. I'll lose everything." I felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction, only a deep sadness. My son wasn't fighting for wealth anymore. He was fighting for scraps of dignity he had already thrown away. When he finally stopped pacing, he turned back to me. His voice was raw. "Dad, please, help me. Cover some of the debts. Just enough to buy me time. You have everything now. I have nothing." I looked at him for a long time. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man hollowed out by greed and arrogance. And yet, beneath it all, I still saw traces of the child Margaret had cradled, the boy who once looked up to me with trust. But love does not erase consequences. "I can't save you from yourself, Andrew," I said quietly. "And I won't dishonor your mother's memory by undoing the very protection she gave me." His face crumpled. He sat back down, burying his head in his hands. For the first time in years, my son looked small. Clark gathered the documents into his folder, his voice final. "The matter is settled. The estate belongs to Edward Hale. The clause has been invoked. Andrew, you have no claim." The sound of those words was like the closing of a door, and as Andrew sat there in silence, trembling with the weight of his choices, I knew Margaret's letter had done more than protect me. It had revealed the truth in a way that could never be denied. The meeting ended, but the echoes of Margaret's words lingered long after the office had emptied. Harrison Clark placed a steady hand on my shoulder before I left, his expression a mixture of respect and sympathy. "She trusted you, Edward," he said softly, "and today she was proven right." I walked out into the crisp afternoon air, feeling heavier and lighter all at once. Heavier because the truth had cut deeper than I could have imagined. Lighter because Margaret's promise that I would be protected had finally revealed itself. For Andrew, however, the storm had only begun. 3 nights later, he came to me. I was back in my own house, the rooms still echoing with Margaret's absence, but also carrying the weight of her protection. The doorbell rang just after midnight. When I opened it, Andrew stood on the porch, his once perfect suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking, "please, I don't know what to do." For a moment I just looked at him. This was the same son who had told me to rot, who had stripped me of dignity without hesitation. Now he stood before me, hollowed out, begging. He stepped inside, uninvited, his hands shaking. "They're coming after me, the debts. I can't cover them. I've lost everything. The house, the accounts, they're gone. I don't even have enough for rent. Dad, I'm drowning." I closed the door behind him slowly. "And what do you expect me to do, Andrew?" He looked up at me, desperation raw in his eyes. "Help me, please, just enough to start over. You don't have to forgive me, but don't let me end like this." The silence between us stretched. I could hear Margaret's voice in my mind, steady and unwavering. "You'll be protected." She had known this moment would come, had prepared me for it. I walked past him into the living room, the same space where he had once stood weeks earlier, declaring me useless. I turned to face him. "You made your choice when you threw me out. Andrew, you chose greed over family, pride over respect. You called me useless, but look at you now." His shoulders collapsed under the weight of my words. He sank into the chair, covering his face with his hands. His sobs filled the room, the same room Margaret had filled with warmth, the same room he had tried to claim as his own. "I'm sorry," he choked out. I thought I could handle it all. I thought I was smarter than everyone else." I sat across from him, steady, calm. "You thought money would save you. But respect, Andrew, respect would have saved you more than any fortune ever could." He lifted his head, tears streaking down his cheeks. "Is there nothing left? No way to fix this?" I shook my head slowly. "Some things can't be fixed. They can only be endured. That is the consequence of your choices." For a long time, neither of us spoke. He wept quietly, and I sat in silence, the weight of both fatherhood and betrayal pressing down on me. Finally, he stood unsteady on his feet. He looked at me one last time, his voice barely a whisper. "I'll never ask again." I walked him to the door. "See that you don't." When the door closed behind him, I stood alone in the quiet. The house was mine again, not just in law, but in spirit. Margaret's memory lingered in every corner, and with it her wisdom. The greatest revenge wasn't the money or the house or even Andrew's downfall. It was the dignity I still carried, the peace Margaret had ensured for me. She had left me more than wealth. She had left me the strength to stand tall, even when my own son had tried to strip me of everything. I looked out the window into the night, the same night that had once swallowed me when I left this house in humiliation. Only now I stood inside, unbroken, resolute. Margaret had been right. I was protected. And Andrew, in his arrogance, had destroyed himself.